Here, getting to know you as you've been installing this work the last couple of weeks. You've been really busy. In June, you did a massive piece in Times Square. And in terms of massive, you did a collaboration with Todd Snyder, floors and floors of your work in New York. You're going to be doing a second collaboration with Nike. Also focusing with trans and non-binary athletes with footwear and apparel. And then your future project that's coming up is going to be at the Houston airport. You're doing a site-specific installation there. So basically, whether I'm looking up, like I've seen the videos of the Times Square piece, like just looking at your gigantic, massive piece, and then like Nike collaboration, like being able to have it on you, and then like say in Houston, you're going to the airport, to your flight, and you're passing your work. With all these different ways that you are introducing your work to the viewer, I wanted to ask you how we can begin, if you can begin to give us an understanding of the origin of your work, of what you're kind of trying to convey, and how you want to connect with the viewer.
Yeah, for sure. So I think for me, it's about creating a visual language, right? To put myself in a context that where I exist in the world, where as like a trans masculine person, I don't have that many references for my identity. So I think that as many avenues as I can hold on to, I am doing that. So whether it's Nike or it's Times Square or it's here, it's about creating that visual language for people to understand me, but for me to understand myself and where I exist and how I exist. And I think that every time I work with a brand, it's always a little rough. It's a lot of explaining, but I'm growing, and I think that people are also growing by interacting with me and my identity as well. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, with each project that you choose, how do you choose each project with your intent, with what you're trying to kind of come across? Like, how does that intermingle with with the decisions that you're making?
Yeah. I think it's whether or not someone sees me, right? So it's like, if the conversation that I'm having feels like an explanation of myself, it's probably not the right fit. So Todd Snyder basically gave me, so the clothing collaboration came first. I created a pattern for him, and then he was like, "Hey, do you want my ad space in Times Square for a month?" And I was like, yes, obviously yes.
And it's not just a billboard. It's
it's
massive.
it's a 200. It's the biggest billboard in Times Square, which I didn't realize. I didn't realize how big it was. And I grew up on the East Coast. I grew up going there. I had reference for it, but to see it in person was crazy. To get the specs for it was crazy. When I was like, oh, the top of this is 70 feet tall by 10 feet, and that was like 4 floors up. That was like the tippy top, right? And so I think, as a trans person, as a queer person, there's so many brands that reach out during Pride, and they're like, oh, how can I make money off of your identity? How can my company be woke, or how can my company be supportive? And so it's always hard to navigate that conversation, because as a queer person, you want to make money. You know what I mean? Like, a lot of opportunity, especially as a trans person, you don't have access to so many opportunities like other people do, because I think you're trying to figure out your identity as you go, right? And it's vulnerable. And whether you legally change your name and you can get like a regular, consistent job, you're taking other jobs and you're trying to make, piecemeal sort of your life together. So,
and being an artist as well.
Yeah, right? Being an artist. And so when I've worked with Nike in the past, and they were really great. They have a queer division. Everyone that I was working with was queer. and I didn't really have to explain that much. And I think that's the important part, is like when you don't have to over explain yourself, you have the energy to do the work.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so you can really be yourself and exist. And so for me, it's like, see people that see me, I'm like, okay, I can do this. Like I can put the work in, and I know that they get it. I know that they're gonna market it in the right way, and they're gonna support me. And that's really what it's about.
Yeah, yeah. I guess that does lead me into like, so I've seen this space, Big Medium, which we're really lucky, and thank you so much for installing here. I've seen the space completely blank. After another show, holes in the wall, just a white space. And when I come into this space, you've activated it. The figures are moving, exuberant. It makes me ask myself, you know, am I a participant in this? Am I an observer? And it's just what you've done with this space in terms of the installation. It makes me want to kind of have a dialogue, and that wanted me to ask you, like, how do you start? Like, can you tell us the process of coming into an empty space? This is much different than Times Square, Nike, you know, all these different ways that you're, you know, showing your art and connecting with people. Like, what's your process?
So I'll just say this, like in the past about 5-6 years, my practice has shifted into mostly installation work. And I think, I mean, the short answer is it's really about occupying space. Mm-hmm. And being a trans person and taking up that space and having ownership of it. And it was really hard when COVID happened. I mean, obviously for everyone, they have their reasons, but my work is meant to be enjoyed at this scale. And I think part of it is, again, like creating that visual language. We talked last night about cave paintings, right, and sort of, you know, the myth of a trans person, right, existing but not necessarily in an art context. And so for me, this forces everyone to really be a part of my start and my journey of language, right? And so as a trans masculine person, my figures are that. And it's about me finding myself in the work, but hopefully other people finding my identity and other identities as well.
Yeah, it's the way you translate that is beautiful. We were talking last night how this is, you know, a place where, especially these walls, you know how to kind of project these and what they might be doing. It's based on dance and movement. The lightning can't be contained. It's also, you're referencing the storm, the colors, the excitement that it makes you feel personally. And then on these walls, you somehow not departed, but made a bridge to a little more of an abstraction. And I think we were talking about this, in my opinion, like the center point back behind above the windows. You were talking about a tenderness that you feel that you want to kind of speak in your work. I guess just within the space, you know, and the way that you handle the dialogue that you have with other people, it made me want to also ask, this piece, this fabric piece with, you did a soft sculpture collaboration with Keaton Wyatt. And can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so this is my first sort of 3D collaboration, and we got together, and I really wanted there to be another element to the work because my work is so flat. I don't have any depth perception at all. So when I work, I'll give you like a little glimpse of my process. So I do all the drawings by hand, kind of individually, and then we'll compose a composition digitally, colored and otherwise. And so typically when I get into a space, I'll project stuff and it's not working, or like I have an idea and then it kind of grows organically. And so when I was working with him, we sat down and I really wanted to work with him because he's so talented, but also like I wanted there to be another element.
Sorry.
thought a sculpture element would be a great addition to the work. Also, the idea of this figure being a lightning rod, because I feel like often as a trans person that is very privileged to have a family that loves me, supports me, friends and otherwise, sometimes you feel like a lightning rod because you're hit with questions and concerns and energy that's not really meant for you, that's might be negative. So this figure kind of is like absorbing all of that negative energy and holding it. And it's also based on Da Vinci's The Vitruvian Man, and the idea of like a perfect man and what a man is, which is something that I ask myself all the time. I'm like, what makes a man? What is a man? Like, how do you be a good man? Like, when a lot of our examples of masculinity are negative, right? And so I think in like my transition and presenting as trans masculine, it's something that I ask myself a lot. Like, how do I be tender? How do I be something else? How am I accessible without like compromising my energy, right? So I think this, for me, that's what that represents. It's like taking that energy and just grounding it, like a lightning rod would. But yeah.
That's great. So I wanted to maybe open up, and if anyone had any questions, feel free to ask Xavier.
I have so many questions. Okay. One is on this front wall. What is the significance of everybody looking up?
So for me, it was like the idea of looking for something, like looking for myself, but also looking for others. And as Elizabeth mentioned, basically the idea behind the show was this feeling that I had when I was a kid, where I was really drawn to storms. Like before they would start, like the smell, the way the light would change, during the storm, and then after. It's like a very defined sort of like thing, you know, and I always felt really drawn to it. And I think part of that is, I mean, to be literal, like in transition from one thing to the next, it's palpable, right? It's visceral. You can hold on to it. And I think for me, it's like that piece in particular, it's like trying to hold on to something like through others and to find someone that is like you, that feels you. I don't know if that answers your question.
I think that's it.
Okay.
That's awesome. But my second question, I'll leave it here, because like I say, I have a ton. But the sculpture here looks like there's stuff hidden underneath. Is there any surprises under there? Like that looks like, I mean, that looks like Velcro straps. This looks like it should come away. I'm just kind of curious. Was it supposed to look like a transition thing, or is there actually
Are you
something
talking about
under
like
there?
the chest area, or? Yeah, I mean,
Both that and the crotch.
yeah. So when we were talking about the piece and how it would look, it was important for it to have texture and also to represent like a trans body.
Sure.
Which, you know, like for me, like I'm not ashamed to have scars, and I feel empowered when I see it because that means that I did something that I wanted to do.
Mm-hmm.
So I wanted the sculpture to have that feel, and they captured it so beautifully.
I think it's amazing.
Yeah, which is, we should all give claps for that.
Yes.
I'm curious as to how you went from actually showing the human form to now morphing it into these beautiful ways of not showing it how you normally do. Is that part of how you're feeling as you are transitioning and your art's transitioning as well?
I think so. We talked a little bit about this last night, where like as a queer person, making abstract art is like feels like a luxury because you don't exist as a figure, right, in the world. So a lot of my work is really just me trying to see myself But I also feel like there's so much beauty in like this area that exists between gender, right? And so these figures are more just that like area between the binary and what's possible. And it just was fun. I mean, honestly, that's to be honest, like it was just fun to do something else. And now that I don't know. I'm like, maybe this is what it's gonna be. But this is actually like a big departure, and it is, I feel like, a turning point for me. I
Do
can't
you
say
feel
that.
like this is your caterpillar and this is your cocoon and you're about to like seriously?
I mean, yeah, it did. Like as soon as I put it up, I also worked differently on this work than I did with this, where like I projected all of this, and this I kind of just like went for.
A lot of like you improvised.
Like a lot of yeah, for sure. And so, which is something that I don't typically do, especially when I had such a tight timeline.
I mean, all of that. You, like timeline, pain, and to be able, and the scale to be able to improvise confidently and successfully and beautifully is really, it's really wonderful.
It was fun.
Yeah.
I'll say that.
Yeah.
I don't really like. I tend to like be really restrained, especially when I know that it's for other people to live in. So this was like a big step for me to kind of let go a little bit, which was nice. Yes.
Did you purposely correlate your outfit tonight with the figure?
This is my date, so that's how I should have introduced this person.
Yes.
To me, some of these figures look like they're coming together, and some of them look like there's like maybe like a struggle kind of going on between them. Could you elaborate on that and just kind of like what the relationship is and what that means to you and your work?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, like this work is really inspired by a storm and what happens, and a lot of it's tied to turmoil, like personal turmoil, but also a lot of my reference was dancers because I wanted it to be fluid, I wanted it to move, I wanted it to feel like a controlled chaos almost. And I think that partially it's reflective of my inner struggle with like I said, like masculinity and like how do you be a man that exists in this world where masculinity is so negative? You know, what's the other option? Like what's possible? And like I think possibility is something that I think about a lot as a trans person because I didn't have a lot of other trans masculine or even trans friends in my life when I was young. And I've done a lot of things that I never thought I would do. And so as like when I was unlocking those little things, like each thing that I was unlocking led to something else that was bigger. I felt like I was possible as a person. And so I think this is like kind of reflective of that, like the journey that I've been on. And like ending with this, which is, you know, kind of more of a tender moment of just like uplifting and encouraging sort of tenderness. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does.
Okay. Sometimes I don't know.
How about you?
So you spoke earlier about the transgender myth, and a lot of the art has the feeling of Greek statues, Greek mythology. I was wondering, what do you mean when you say the transgender myth?
So I think for me it means like mythology has informed so much of our culture, right? It's like we have these archetypes of different time periods and what someone is and how they existed and when they existed. And I think as a trans masculine person, it's really hard to trace our existence. And as a queer person, you know, we lost so many people. We lost a generation of people from AIDS. And a lot of our culture is storytelling. And so to me, mythology and storytelling are the same. And so I think, like we talked about cave painting last night and how language is developed and how we are visible and how we're represented. And so for me, it's the mythology of me, really. and also where I'm going, where I've been, who's been there before me. I call it my transcestors. It's like the people that have, you know what I mean? And I have friends that are a lot younger than me, and I work with out youth, and so it's kids that are, you know, as young as 5 that are discovering these things. And I think it's important to continue that, to make the mythology real, to be a real person, and to show that in my work, but also in my life.
So maybe one more question, and then we'll probably wrap up, and then we can. Yes.
Your work uses such this hyper simplification of color blocking and palette to explain a really extremely complex idea and feeling. How did you get drawn to this sort of medium of representation, and do you see yourself continuing down this road, or, you know, I don't know, changing, or?
I think for me, it's like, how much can I relate with simplicity? And again, to like talk about like cave paintings or this sort of storytelling that's palatable. I also am like, it's a challenge, right? To like to emote something with taking away a lot of things. I think that figurative work has always been important to me because I don't really exist in a lot of ways in popular culture or in the art world. And so it's about creating something that other people can also see themselves reflected in. And I think keeping like a faceless person, or even like with this work, you know, that could be anyone. Again, like the fact that I have no depth perception also is a very much a part of that. And color palette has always been something that I've struggled with, but when I stopped thinking about trying to do everything and just trying to do one thing, it really, because I think for me it's like, it's so emotional, right, to try and tell people who you are, especially when you come from a place of not knowing who you are, or like not having a context for who you are. So when I scaled all that back and just did this, it was like, felt very freeing. And I think this is a direction that I might be going in by using more fluid shapes. But I like the installation process because everyone can live in the art and be with it. And it feels like a collaboration with the space, which I'm lucky to have this space and for all of you to be here to enjoy it. But yeah.
Xavier, thank you so much.